Good morrow, friends. I'm Jordan, and this is Not Strictly History. Hello and welcome, everybody. It is, as always, so good to be here with you today. I'm actually recording in a different place today than I ever have, so maybe you can feel the different energy. I don't know. I'm really excited to be here today for many reasons, mostly because it's actually been a very, very long time since I recorded an episode. There has been a lot of change in my life recently, and so thank heaven I had some episodes in the cache. Otherwise, you guys would have been without content, and we can't have that. I know how much you look forward to my episodes every week. I mean, come on, who doesn't? So I feel like I had a point to that. Gosh, I really am off my game, aren't I? Anyway, hello, everybody. Welcome to Not Strictly History. And again, it's great to be here with you today. I'm really, really excited about today's episode. And yes, of course, I know I say that every single time because to one degree or another, it's usually true. Um, it's, I, but today's episode is just it's really, really special, you guys. It's really, really special. And I have been excited about it for a very long time. So, obviously, at this point, we've done several episodes that speak a lot to the title of Not Strictly History. But I think that this episode speaks to the idea of Not Strictly History even more. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we're talking about a topic that's not only very near and dear to my own heart, but also to many of you that are listening to this right now. So many of our topics, I feel like um, I'm teaching you something, which I love to do, or we're discussing something intellectually, which again I love to do. This topic, I'll be teaching you some things, and we'll be discussing some things. But overall, I feel like this episode is just a chance for us to come together and talk about something that is just genuinely beautiful and wholesome and that many of us have great memories about. So I'm just so excited. Today we're talking about I'm going to say somebody. We're talking about somebody who has changed the world literally and constantly offers people hope and happiness. And of course, you know exactly who that is. Today, my friends, we are talking about the one and only Winnie the Pooh. That's right, friends. Winnie the Pooh, Pooh Bear, Winnie the Pooh himself. That is who we're talking about today. And I, like many of you, and so many, many others around this world, I grew up with Winnie the Pooh and all of his wonderful friends. I have so many memories in my childhood of Winnie the Pooh that I could probably go on for hours about it. There are a few that I want to share with you, though, because I feel as if they are core memories for me. They really make up a lot of who I am as a person, to be honest. I realized that more and more as I was writing this episode. Um, it's crazy, but we'll touch on that. So one of the first this actually isn't a memory. This because I don't think I was alive at the time or I was very small. I don't really know. But I love this story. So the very first VCR that my parents bought, they were parents of several young children and they bought their very first VCR. And the first VHS tape that they purchased was Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day. Again, this isn't a memory for me. This is just a story that I've heard, but I've heard this story so many times how that was the very first movie they ever bought as a family and how they all sat around the TV and watched Winnie the Pooh together. And it's just such a touching story, and I've always loved it so much. Growing up in that home, I grew up on a farm in the country, and because of that, I always kind of imagined that I was in the Hundred Acre Wood. And it was my dream to someday find an old hollowed out tree that I could make my own house in. Like, that was the epitome of everything. And I don't think I've ever actually told anybody that, but I would lay awake at night and just know that if I could just have a little bit of time to look, I could find the perfect hollowed out tree for my own house. Like, I was just convinced. I knew it. And as I said earlier, I have so many more childhood memories that are full of Winnie the Pooh. Every single one of them is so precious to me. My older brother had a really big stuffed Winnie the Pooh. who was just always there. Like, there are so many memories of just the huge Winnie the Pooh just bebopping around. I had a Winnie the Pooh nightgown. I also remember just sitting in the living room of this old farmhouse that we lived in, watching the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. And I tangibly remember many, many times sitting there and being so, so sad when the movie was over. Like, I remember this very, very clearly. I remember pretending to be the masked defender. I remember playing like we were in the Cowboy Pooh episode. I remember finding rocks in the yard and wondering if the ghost of Long John Cottontail would come and try to get them from me. I remember running through the yard and the fields searching for Christopher Robin. I mean, the memories go on and on. One of the most important ones, though, is it actually this started long, long before I was born. So when my mother was pregnant with my oldest sibling, she purchased several pair of footy pajamas, and they were Winnie the Pooh themed, and they came in several different colors. They're very, very soft and fuzzy, and they have subtle Winnie the Pooh embroidery on them. These teeny tiny, beautiful Winnie the Pooh pajamas have been used by every single one of my mom's kids. Whenever she had a newborn baby, she used the Winnie the Pooh pajamas, which is saying a lot because there's 10 kids in my family. So all of us have worn the Winnie the Pooh pajamas. And I remember my younger brother and sister, fresh from the hospital, just, oh my goodness. I remember my little brother. Hopefully he's not embarrassed hearing this. I love you, bro. I remember him in the green pair of Winnie the Pooh pajamas, really, really tiny. His hair was all fuzzy. Like the newborn smell was still very much there, just all snuggled up in the green pair of Winnie the Pooh jammies. And it's just the most precious memory ever. So there's actually lots and lots of pictures of every single one of us in the Winnie the Pooh jammies. They're really, really special. And they're this one really precious thing that all of my siblings and I trace back to our childhood. And I just think it's really special. Um, I also remember just really, really beautiful autumn days where my mom would make pumpkin cookies and we would watch Winnie the Pooh and the Search for Christopher Robin. There is something about this film, you guys. I mean, to this day and so forever, the song that Pooh Bear and Christopher Robin sing at the beginning of the movie brings me to tears. It does. That's actually one of the ways that I knew one of my best friends, Quinn, and I knew that we were meant to be best friends because one day, quite a ways into our relationship, I don't actually remember how this happened. But anyway, that song was brought up and she said something like, "Don't, I'll cry." And I looked at her and I was like, "Oh my gosh, Quinn, we are soul best friends." And ever since then, once in a while, we'll talk about Pooh Bear and we're like, "No, you can't talk about that song. Like, it's just not okay." So it's a real thing, you guys. That song is so precious and it just has a nostalgia inside of my heart that is just, I mean, and that's how Pooh Bear is in general, right? Like, there is something about Winnie the Pooh that just burrows into your soul. And I'm rambling now. But anyway, so back to this this memory of watching this film, Winnie the Pooh and the Search for Christopher Robin. So not only does that song have huge sentimental value to me, but the movie itself is also totally a core memory for me. It's a very safe place, actually. When I want to feel safe, I can watch that movie and everything is okay. But not only that, there are also so many like hysterical moments in this film. If you have, like, I don't know if you guys really fathom how funny Winnie the Pooh is. Winnie the Pooh himself and all of his friends, and just the jet, like, you guys, these characters are hysterical. Case in point, okay? At the beginning of the movie, Pooh Bear goes to Piglet's house to try and find Christopher Robin, and Piglet is at the very top of the branches of the tree of his house. And if you know Pooh Bear, you know that Piglet's house is huge. His huge tree is his house is this huge tree, and he's on the very top branch. And Pooh says, "Piglet, what are you doing up there?" And he says, "Christopher Robin told me to look my fear of heights into the eye and conquer it." And then Tigger shows up and he says, "Piglet, there's nothing to be afraid of. I mean, falling off of this tree is nothing different than just getting out of bed in the morning." And Piglet goes, "Oh, really?" And Tigger says to him, "Exactly. except for the splat at the end, they're practically similar. And if that, oh my goodness, it's just beautiful. There's also this moment where Rabbit is harvesting his garden and this stubborn carrot won't come out of the ground. And Rabbit has this very official Rabbit's gardening manual that's like absolutely beautiful. I just love that part. And there's also the moment at the very end of the movie when Rabbit says, "That owl, I knew Skull had another Y in it." And if I had $1 for every time I have quoted that line, well, I'd have a lot of dollars. So, obviously, this is the longest intro we've ever done. I've already gone on for quite a while about Winnie the Pooh and how much I love him and how much he and his friends have been part of my life, which is again the reason that I decided to do this episode. Because not only is Winnie the Pooh integral to my life and my memories, but I know that I'm not the only one that feels this way. So, we're going to go over the history of Winnie the Pooh. We'll find out where he came from and how he got where he is today, which means that we'll also be spending some time getting to know the real life Christopher Robin. And we will discuss some of the different adaptations and really what makes Winnie the Pooh so special. So let's get into it. So, some of you may know Winnie the Pooh's origin story, and some of you may not. Now, if you do or don't, that's cool. We're going to talk about it. And there may be some things that if you do know, you didn't know. And if you didn't know, then you sure didn't know. So we're going to, here we go. Our story, the Winnie the Pooh story, my friends, it starts on January 18th, 1882. And this was the day that a boy named Alan Alexander Milne was born. A. Milne grew up at Henley House School in London at 67 Mortimer Road, which was a small independent school that was run by his father. So he obviously went to school there. A did. And at one point, he was even taught by H.G. Wells, which I did not know and completely blew my mind. You know him as an early science fiction author. He wrote The War of the Worlds, just saying. He taught at Henley House for 2 years. Fun little fact. So, A. Milne went on to study at Trinity College, Cambridge on a mathematics scholarship. He actually graduated with a bachelor's degree in mathematics in 1903. While he was there, he edited and wrote for the student magazine, and he later came to the attention of a magazine called Punch Magazine, and at Punch Magazine, he became a contributor, and much later, he became the assistant editor there. Now, this next fact about A. Milne is actually one of my favorite things to ever exist. This is something that I didn't know until I was doing research and writing, and it is just chef's kiss perfect. So, A. Milne was also an amateur cricket player, and he played on a few different teams, and he actually played with many other writers. I'll tell you. Does the name Arthur Conan Doyle mean anything to you? Yes, my friends, that is right. The author of Sherlock Holmes, baby. A. Milne played cricket with Arthur Conan Doyle. And that is a universe crossover I am here for in every single way. So, A. Milne was primarily a playwright for most of his life, until Winnie the Pooh, of course. In 1903, he married Dorothy D. Selencourt, who went by Daphne. He also served in both World Wars. In World War I, he was a lieutenant in the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, and in World War II, he was captain in the Home Guard. But let's slide back a bit to the year 1920, which is 7 years into the marriage of A. Milne and his wife Daphne. In 1920, Daphne gave birth to their son, Christopher Robin. Moment of silence for this impactful moment in history. Okay, now we can continue. Christopher Robin Milne was born on August 21st, 1920. He was actually later asked about being an only child, and his answer was that he was probably an only child because, quote, he had been a long time coming, which is actually kind of sad. So bless his heart. He was originally going to be named Rosemary if he was a girl, or if he was a boy, his father wanted to name him Billy. Just Billy, not William, which I find really intriguing. Instead of this, though, each parent ended up choosing a name, and thus we have his name, Christopher Robin. Within his family, though, Christopher Robin was often called Billy Moon, which was a combination of his nickname and how he pronounced Milne when he was a little boy. So, again, even though he wasn't named Billy, sometimes he was called that as a little boy. And there is nothing more precious than how little kids pronounce things, and then that somehow ends up being like a nickname. That I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me with my nieces and nephews. Anyway, but I digress. So from 1929 onward, so when he was 9 years old, they started just merely calling him Christopher. And later he stated that it was, quote, the only name I really feel to be mine, which is fair. Throughout his childhood, Christopher Robin was cared for by his nanny, Olive Rand Brockwell, who he referred to simply as New. She cared for him from the time he was a baby until he entered boarding school in May of 1930, which is a long time. He said, quote, we lived together in a large nursery on the top floor, and that, quote, apart from her fortnight's holiday every September, we had not been out of each other's sight for more than a few hours at a time. Which, I mean, just think of boarding school must have been so hard for him and for his nanny and for his, like, my goodness, like what a transition, what a change to have to say goodbye. Like it's honestly heartbreaking. However, we're going to back up a bit again. Let's go back to the day, August 21st, 1921, otherwise known as Christopher Robin's first birthday. For this birthday, Christopher Robin was given a stuffed bear by his father, and A.A. Milne had bought this stuffed bear at Harrods department store in London. At Christmas time that year, so only a couple of months later, Christopher was given a toy donkey as a present, who he named Eeyore, and not long after that, he was given a little piglet, who he named Piglet. Christopher Robin was also given Kanga and Roo, though we don't have dates for that. So one really cool thing, Christopher Robin and his mother Daphne were really the ones who brought these stuffed animals to life. They're the ones that began making up stories about them, who kind of made them into characters and into real beings. And this is what inspired A.A. Milne to start writing down stories and coming up with his own stories. So now that we've got some of this background established, let's jump ahead just a teeny bit to the year 1924. Because, my friends, this is the year that every single one of us have a foundation in, whether we know it or not. It's true. Did you know that your entire life began in 1924? You didn't? Okay, well, now you do, and I'm going to tell you why. Okay, friends, so again, we're in the year 1924. And on November 6th, 1924, A.A. Milne had a work released that was entitled When We Were Very Young. This work was a book of poetry with illustrations by E.H. Shepard, who is very important to this story, so you may know who he is. And this book quickly became a bestseller. Now, one thing that you might not know is that this book is the first very official time that Winnie the Pooh first came into existence. A fun fact is that originally, Christopher Robin named his teddy bear Edward Bear. And in this book, When We Were Very Young, A.A. Milne had written a poem about Edward Bear that is entitled Teddy Bear. And the first time that Teddy Bear was released to the public was February 13th of 1924. It appeared in Punch magazine. So that February 13th, 1924 in the magazine is technically the first time the world got Pooh Bear. But then this poem again was later added to the book When We Were Very Young, which was released later that year. So the book begins with an introduction entitled Just Before We Begin. And in part, this introduction tells the readers to imagine for themselves who the narrator of this book might be, but it strongly suggests to them that the narrator is a young boy by the name of Christopher Robin. So again, remember, at this point, Winnie the Pooh is named Edward Bear. So the next year, A.A. Milne was commissioned by London's Evening News to write a story that would appear on Christmas Eve. And in my notes, I say, briefly talk about how crazy magical that is. Okay, let's briefly talk about how crazy magical that is. Can you imagine getting to write a story for the Christmas Eve newspaper in London. Like, I, you guys, you guys, it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. And the fact that A. Milne got this opportunity and used it for Pooh Bear is so touching. It really is more than I can bear. So, the story that he wrote was, once again, this featured Edward Bear, but he had been renamed. What? That's right, my friends. This, the Christmas Eve story, was the first time that Pooh Bear appeared by name, which is really important. So instead of E.H. Shepard, an artist named J.H. Dowd is the one who illustrated this story. And this was the first time that Pooh Bear was drawn wearing a shirt. Interesting, right? So this shirt was later colored red, as you all know, in a reproduction. But originally, the illustrations were in black and white. So not only did Winnie the Pooh first appear by name in the Christmas Eve story, but he also appeared wearing his shirt in the Christmas Eve story, which I just love so dang much. There is so much to unpack there, so many firsts, so many beautiful things, and I love it. I think it's so beautiful. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about this name change. So we're going to take a quick break from the timeline of events because we need to talk about the subject of Winnie the Pooh's name changing. Because, again, for the 7 millionth time, Winnie the Pooh was originally named Edward Bear, which I've never said this. Honestly, I find the name Edward Bear incredibly sweet. I would like to go on the record as saying that. But anyway, come with me for just a minute. You know, I say that a lot. And then I ask you to come with me, and then I talk at you for an hour. Come with me while I continue to talk at you. Because we're going to leave England. We're leaving England for just a minute, and we're going to hop across the pond to Canada. Okay, so we're in Canada now, and it's World War I, my friends. And a man by the name of Harry Colborne was on his way to England to serve in the war. He had been assigned as an officer in the Fort Garry Horse Cavalry Regiment, not as an ordinary soldier, mind you, but as a vet. That is right. And no, I did not connect the dots that back when they had cavalry, they needed vets in a regiment. And you may make fun of me for that because I was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, that's so great. He got to be a vet. Well, yeah, Jordan, horses went to war. Anyway, so Harry Colborne was going to England to serve in World War I as a vet. While he was still in Canada, Harry ran into a hunter who just happened to have a bear cub in his possession. You know, things that hunters do. And Harry decided to buy the bear from the hunter. So, the obvious conclusion to come to at this moment, honestly, I really don't know why he did this. Why did he buy the bear cub from the hunter? What was his reasoning? I don't know. None of us know. We don't really know. He was a vet, obviously, who really cared about animals. Maybe he bought the little lady to keep her safe. That's mere speculation. I have literally no idea why this man on his way to war decided it was a good idea to buy a bear. But I'm really glad that he did. So anyway, he purchased this little female bear cub for $20, 20 Canadian dollars, and he named her Winnie after his adopted hometown of Winnipeg, Manitoba. So Winnie traveled to England with Harry, where she gained unofficial recognition as the mascot of the regiment. In other words, everybody loved her. Of course they did. So when the regiment left England to go fight in France, Harry decided to leave Winnie at the London Zoo so that she would be kept safe. After the war, Harry officially donated her to the London Zoo because not only was she very happy and secure there, but she had become a much loved attraction. Everybody went to the London Zoo to see Winnie, which of course brings us to Christopher Robin, who visited the zoo with his father and met Winnie, and she had a really big impact on him. But okay, hold on, friends, because there's more. This is where we got Winnie, but obviously there's more to go off of here. So let's talk about that. Once upon a time, Christopher Robin and his family went on a holiday. And while they were on holiday, Christopher Robin made the acquaintance of a swan that one of their family friends kept as a pet. This swan was named Pooh, and Christopher absolutely loved this swan, and he spent a ton of time with it while they were on holiday. In fact, this swan made such an impression upon the entire family that A. Milne made him a character in his own right. Pooh the Swan appears in a poem that is also included in the When We Were Very Young book. So I'm actually going to be able to link the text of When We Were Very Young because this book entered the public domain in the United States in January of 2020. So you can follow that link to see the full text of the poetry collection where Pooh Bear first appeared in our lives. Again, the poem that he is in is called Teddy Bear. So there you have it. Okay. After this, Edward Bear was renamed Winnie the Pooh. I just love it so much that Christopher Robin decided to name his teddy bear after these animals that he loved so much and that had such an impact on him. I find that incredibly beautiful and just so sweet. And I mean, what can you even say about that? What more can you say? It's just so great. So far, we have talked about how Winnie the Pooh came into existence. We've talked about his name, and we've talked about the first few times that he appeared in print. Now, we need to talk about the man himself, as in Pooh Bear himself, because he is the whole reason that we are here. And there are very few creatures on this earth who I have more love and admiration for. Again, he's the reason that we're here. So let's begin with Pooh Bear's appearance. As we have already covered, he wasn't wearing a shirt in the original sketches, but this was added for the Christmas Eve story, which was only the third time that Pooh Bear had been in print. So after this, he was always illustrated wearing his shirt. But come with me on this, my friends. Even though the Winnie the Pooh that we love and know and everything, is 100% based on the real Christopher Robin's teddy bear, he actually looks nothing like this teddy bear, which you may have noticed if you've ever seen pictures of Christopher Robin's actual bear. He looks nothing like him. And this is because both A. Milne and E.H. Shepard had realized that Christopher Robin's bear was, quote, too gruff looking, not very cuddly. So they decided that they would have to have a different looking bear for the illustrations. And this was when E.H. Shepard noticed that his own son had a teddy bear. Now, this teddy bear's name was Growler, and he was very, very squishable. So E.H. Shepard did a sketch of Winnie the Pooh based off of Growler, and he sent it over to A. Milne, who, quote, said it was perfect. And it's also said that some of the illustrations of Christopher Robin that appear in the books are partly based on E.H. Shepard's son, as well as the real Christopher Robin. So this is how we got the Winnie the Pooh that we know and love. But we also need to talk about the many, many things that make him who he is. Because even though his character has evolved over the years with books and film adaptations, Winnie the Pooh is just really always himself. You can always depend on Winnie the Pooh being Winnie the Pooh, which is one of the things I love most about him. Particularly in the original works, Pooh Bear is portrayed as a fairly slow witted little man who is also quite naive. However, he's really friendly and thoughtful and very, very steadfast. Pooh is always thinking about his friends instead of himself, unless it comes to food, in which case he does his best to help his friends even when he's hungry. It gets him into trouble a couple of times. So it is well known to all of us and everyone, that Winnie the Pooh is known as a, quote, a bear of very little brain. However, even though this may be the case, he has a very, very solid amount of common sense that the rest of his friends don't really possess. Which is why when it comes right down to it, Pooh Bear often saves his friends with a quote unquote clever idea. Some examples of this from the original works. At one point, Pooh Bear comes up with the idea of using an umbrella as a boat in order to save Piglet from a flood. He also discovers the North Pole by picking up a long stick to help fish Roo out of the river. He also invented the game of Pooh Sticks, And at one point, he saves Eeyore from the river by dropping a large rock on one side of him so that he would be washed toward the riverbank. So, yes, Winnie the Pooh has a lot of common sense, and he ends up saving the day most of the time. Another really important aspect of Pooh Bear's character that you find in the original stories is that he is a very talented poet. That's right. He's really, really good at composing poetry and songs, and he's often making up poems or humming tunes. And this is again a really big part of the original works and the early film adaptations of Winnie the Pooh. It's something that's gotten a little bit lost, I think, anyway, in more recent works. But one thing that I love is that Pooh Bear he's very aware of his talent with words, though he is humble about it. And he's also humble about the fact that he's a bear of very little brain. This happens to be one of his most endearing qualities in my mind. You know, he doesn't let this stop him. He has his thoughtful spot, and he's always going think, think, think. Even though he knows he isn't the smartest thing in the entire planet, like, he doesn't let that stop him from anything. He just keeps going. And we do need to talk a teeny bit more about his role as a poet. So at one point in the original stories, Owl's house blows down, which traps Owl, Pooh, and Piglet inside. Piglet is the only one who's small enough to escape all the wreckage and go get help to rescue them. So Piglet is, of course, frightened at this prospect, but Pooh Bear promises to compose him a song about the whole thing in return for him saving them, which is the cutest thing in the entire world. And I want a full-length feature film about that. Okay? I want a film about this song that Pooh Bear wrote for Piglet to praise his bravery in saving them. Why don't we have that movie? Anyone? Can anyone tell me? Okay, that's cool. So, some other fun facts about Winnie the Pooh. He, of course, loves honey. He also loves condensed milk and is usually in the mood for a snack. He's incredibly polite. So, whenever he visits his friends, his desire to be given a snack really conflicts with the impoliteness of asking for a snack. In the original works, at one point on Eeyore's birthday, Pooh Bear is bringing him a pot of honey as his birthday gift, and he accidentally eats the honey along the way, which he actually feels very badly about. But he ends up giving the pot to Eeyore anyway, and he terms it as a, quote, useful pot to put things in, which just illustrates Pooh Bear in every way, and I love it so much. Winnie the Pooh is also in the habit of having a little something around 11 a.m. In the original books, again, it is explained that the clock, um, it has stopped at 5 minutes to 11. So really, any time could be snack time. And I am just so wildly here for this logic because that's incredible. But it's also a really, really good example of how Pooh Bear thinks, really, and how things are perceived by him and his friends in the stories. I just love it. And I'm going to have a tangent right here because my notes tell me to, which is a good idea. My notes say tangent about A.A. Milne creating the train of thought / way things are. We need to talk about this. The way that Winnie the Pooh and his friends think about life and see life and perceive things is incredibly unique, very specific to them. And it's not something that you just make up. I mean, obviously it is because it happened, but like, it's not something that it's not common. You hear things like they say or see things and you think, oh, that's Winnie the Pooh. It's so specific to them. And I think it's so incredible that A.A. Milne was able to create such a culture for them. And it's just so beautiful. It really, really, it truly is. One more thing to mention. So a man named Devin Cogan, sorry, dude, of Entertainment Weekly, he described Pooh Bear as having, quote, a philosophy of kindness and integrity. Not only am I here for anything lovely that could possibly be said about Winnie the Pooh, but I just love it that his character is loved by so many people and that he's just legitimately a fixture in our society. I love that so much because he is this beacon of integrity and kindness and love. And I think it's so beautiful and so important in our society, really. Okay, friends, so the time has come for us to return to the timeline and let's do a very quick recap. As you'll recall, we just finished talking about A. Milne's Christmas Eve story in 1925, where Winnie the Pooh appeared by name as Winnie the Pooh, and he appeared in his much loved t shirt for the first time. So let's skedaddle into the next year, which is the year 1926. In October of 1926, this was when the very first collection of Pooh Bear stories was published, and it was entitled simply Winnie the Pooh. Immediately, this book was a huge success, both critically and commercially. At the beginning of the book, A. Milne explained that Pooh Bear was Christopher Robin's Edward Bear, the one that the audience was more familiar with from the previous stories, and that he had been renamed by Christopher Robin. In the very first chapter, A. Milne offers an explanation of why Winnie the Pooh is often called just Pooh, and it is the most precious thing in the entire world. So I'll read this little part to you. Quote, "But his arms were so stiff they stayed up straight in the air for more than a week, and whenever a fly came and settled on his nose, he had to blow it off. And I think, but I am not sure, that that is why he is always called Pooh." So this is incredibly lovely for like 75 million reasons. But if you remember from the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh, in the very beginning, like the intro, Pooh Bear is shown blowing a fly off of his nose by going Pooh, Pooh. You remember that? Thank you. Which brings me to another point about this particular adaptation. It is very, very true to the original works, and that just makes me really happy. So anyway, Winnie the Pooh continued to show up in A. Milne's poetry, which is beautiful. In 1927, Milne published another poetry collection entitled Now We Are Six, and it includes several more poems involving Pooh Bear. Then in 1928, we very, very happily get another full length book full of Winnie the Pooh's adventures, which is entitled The House at Pooh Corner. It was again published in 1928 and, of course, was a huge, huge success. So, we need to talk about the inspiration behind all of this. We need to talk a little bit more about A. Milne and Christopher Robin and how this all came about, really. So, the thing to remember about Winnie the Pooh's story is that, it not only involves him and his friends, but it involves A. Milne and Christopher Robin and their adventures. That's where all the inspiration comes from. So, we're going to talk a little bit about their life and their adventures because, again, this is what inspired Winnie the Pooh. As we all know, Christopher Robin received his teddy bear for his first birthday. He then received Eeyore later, and then Piglet, though we aren't sure when he got Piglet. And eventually he also got Tigger, Kanga, and Roo. All of these toys are currently on display at the main branch of the New York Public Library, except for Roo, sadly. Very, very tragically, the Roo toy was lost in the 1930s. Nobody knows where Roo went. It's really sad, but everybody else is on display again at the New York Public Library. So listen, friends, I know what you're saying. I can hear you saying it. You're saying, hey, excuse me, what about Owl and Rabbit? My friends, I have not forgotten about Owl and Rabbit. But something that you may not know, I actually did not know this, was that Christopher Robin never had an owl or a rabbit toy. He didn't. It's true. These characters were actually made up by A. Milne and added to the story. And of course, I hear all of you other people. For those of you in the Gopher fan club, fear not, okay? Gopher was actually later added by Disney, so he doesn't feature in any of the original works. But I mean, Gopher is iconic, and he is still obviously a very beloved member of the Winnie the Pooh family. So here we go. This moment for Gopher, everybody. Feel it. Thank you. Now we'll go on. One thing that we have yet to talk about is the very, very magical place that Pooh Bear and all of his friends call home, the 100 Acre Wood. Now, the inspiration behind the 100 Acre Wood is a little bit more well known, but we're absolutely going to cover it because that's why we're here. So the 100 Acre Wood was inspired by, it's very true, the 500 Acre Wood, which is located in Ashdown Forest in East Sussex, which is 30 miles south of London. So A. Milne and his family were, of course, obviously Londoners. But in 1925, he purchased a country home that was located 1 mile north of the forest. This home was at Cochford Farm near Hartfield. So after they bought their country home, the family spent as much time there as they possibly could. They were obviously still living in London, but Christopher Robin later wrote, quote, "The four of us, my father, mother, myself, and my nanny, would pile into a large blued car and drive down every Saturday morning and back again every Monday afternoon. And we would spend a whole glorious month there in the spring and 2 months in the summer." That is the most magical thing I've ever heard in my life. Christopher Robin also said that most of his father's visits to the forest at the time were family expeditions on foot, quote, "to make yet another attempt to count the pine trees," which this is actually a really, really cute story. There was a copse of pine trees that was really, really close to their house, and they always tried to count how many pine trees were in it, and they could never, ever land on the exact number. Now, I can't remember I think it was 78 or 79. Don't quote me on that. It was something like that. But every time they counted it, it was one or the other. They could never, ever count how many trees there were, which is such a Winnie the Pooh thing to have happen. And it's really beautiful. So many of the locations in the Winnie the Pooh stories can be associated with real places in and around the forest near this country home. Christopher Robin later wrote in his biography, quote, "Pooh's forest and Ashdown Forest are identical," which I just love. Now, E.H. Shepard's illustrations were also directly inspired by the distinctive landscape in Ashdown Forest. If you look at the landscapes of the original Winnie the Pooh sketches, these can actually just be directly matched to views in the forest, which is just lovely. We need to make some kind of like interactive map guidebook type thing. That would be so cool. Somebody get on that, please. Thank you. Um, Lots of people get inspiration from wherever it is they live. Let's talk about this for a second. But there's something about this that just feels like it's on another level. Most artists, no matter what kind of art that they're creating, they usually get art from the place that they live or the things that surround them. But this story in particular, it just feels different, to take a countryside and create such a beautiful world out of it that's honestly just so pure is something that I find incredibly inspiring. I really, really do. And more than a little bit spectacular. I'll just say that. So, we actually need to take just a minute and talk about one specific location that is both real and a very large part of the stories because it's iconic. So it is a footbridge where, in the stories, Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin play the game Pooh Sticks. And this footbridge is actually real. It is the bridge across Millbrook Posingford Wood, close to Cochford Farm. Now, I mentioned earlier in the stories that Pooh Bear invented this game, which, if you don't know what Pooh Sticks is, I will explain it very quickly. So each participant of the game chooses a stick from the nearby forest, and everyone lines up on one side of the bridge. At the very same time, everybody drops their stick into the water, and whoever's stick comes out on the other side of the bridge first wins the game. So again, this footbridge is actually real, and Pooh Sticks was a game that was made up by Christopher Robin and his father, and they used to play it all the time. So the bridge, again, for the millionth time, is a real place, and to this day, it's still a major tourist attraction. People come there all the time to play Pooh Sticks. And, just to drive home the purity and wonder of this, there is actually a world championship for Pooh Sticks held each year in Oxfordshire. That's correct, a world championship for Pooh Sticks. And it is now my number one priority to attend this event because like why aren't we all here for this? Why aren't we all rooting for this? Why isn't this in the news? Like, why did it take me researching this topic to learn about the world championship of Pooh Sticks? I don't know. I'm a little offended. It's so great. It's so great. So, one more fact about the bridge. So, in 1999, the footbridge had become really unsafe and it had to be replaced. But the architect that was hired for the job completely based the new design off of all of the drawings by E.H. Shepard from the books, meaning that the new footbridge it's completely retained the style of the original. It's basically just a remake of the original, which is just the most inspiring thing in the world. I mean, what more can you say about that, really? Okay, so we've talked about Cochford Farm. We've talked about all of this glorious inspiration. Let's return once again to the timeline of the story, shall we? Okay, so after 1928's The House at Pooh Corner, A. Milne did not write any more works about Winnie the Pooh. And let's just talk about this for a second. The two books about Pooh Bear, Winnie the Pooh and The House at Pooh Corner, have been loved both commercially and critically from the very beginning. They have constantly been praised for how light and beautiful they are, how readable the prose is, just how outstanding they are. I mean, obviously, these were made to be children's books, but they have always, from the very beginning, been so much more than that. And it was, I don't remember who said it, but it was said that these books are really like the epitome of what British success in the 1920s was. And if you know anything about the 1920s, even if all you know is the roaring 20s, you know that the 20s just, they weren't a really good time. Everybody was mentally ill and very disillusioned. So to have Winnie the Pooh be the mark of success for the 1920s, I mean, obviously this is referring to Britain, but I just find that incredibly pure. And it's like the one thing we can pick out of the 1920s and be like, okay, something pure, in fact, came out of that decade. We can be really happy about this. That's just my own opinion. So, just to hammer the years into your brain a little bit more, we got the last full work, The House at Pooh Corner, in 1928. In 1930, a man by the name of Stephen Schlesinger purchased both the United States and Canadian merchandising, television, recording, and other trade rights to the Winnie the Pooh works from A. Milne for $1,000 as an advance and 66% of Schlesinger's income. My dudes, can you say ka-ching? Thank you. So that was in 1930. By 1931, literally 1 year later, Winnie the Pooh had become a $50 million a year business. We have so much to talk about with this, okay? What that was 1 year later. 1 year. Okay, thank you. And let's also talk about how it was 1931. 1931 and Winnie the Pooh was a $50 million a year business. Listen, I did an inflation calculator that because that's just out of this world, but that's ridiculous. That is wow. Just wow, okay? And I actually am a really big admirer of this man, Stephen Schlesinger. He did so many good things for Winnie the Pooh, and I think that if Winnie the Pooh had to be, marketed and really, really, what is that word that I'm looking for? You're probably all yelling at me right now. If Winnie the Pooh really had to just be commercialized and monetized so much, I think that this man was the right man for the job because he really, really respected the Pooh Bear works and the purity. And he, even though he marketed them and, made so much money off of all of this, he did it in a very, very good way. And I really appreciate that about him. I really, really appreciate that A. Milne and his works were treated well, and that to this day, the integrity and beauty and purity of Winnie the Pooh and his friends is still intact. And that is in large part due to this man who kept that alive. So he marketed Winnie the Pooh and his friends for over 30 years. And he created the very first Winnie the Pooh doll, the first record, board game, puzzle, US radio broadcast, the first animations, and was also heavily involved in making the very first Pooh Bear motion picture. So, the very first time that Winnie the Pooh and his friends appeared in color was in 1932. Winnie the Pooh was colored by Schlesinger, so he was actually the one who gave Winnie the Pooh his red shirt. Again, he had had his shirt for several years now, but Schlesinger is the one who colored it red. And this was for a feature on an RCA Victor picture record. I don't know what a picture record is. If any of you do, let me know. Should have looked that up, didn't. So that was in 1932. Let's jump ahead a little bit to the year 1961. This was the year in which the Walt Disney Company licensed certain film and other rights of the Winnie the Pooh stories from A. Milne's estate and from Schlesinger's estate. So Disney adapted the stories, which included dropping the hyphens from Pooh Bear's name. If you didn't know, originally, in the original A. Milne works, Winnie the Pooh has hyphens in it. Again, Disney dropped these. And they also made a series of features that eventually became one of Disney's most successful franchises. So, just for a few little extra details, Pooh Bear has been voiced by three different people: Sterling Holloway, Hal Smith, and Jim Cummings. Three men who we owe many, many, many happy things to. I'm just saying. So, these popular features that Disney made were eventually released by Disney all throughout the 60s, and they did so well, all of these small features, that they eventually combined them. And this combination was the one and only feature length film entitled The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which was released in 1977. I have already referenced this movie a bunch of times. It is, again, the very first full length feature film we ever received about Pooh Bear and his friends. And this movie is magical in so many millions of ways. But one of the things that I love about it, just the very, very most, and have, again, already mentioned, is how true it is to the original stories. If you'll remember, Pooh Bear spends a really good amount of time making up songs in this movie, which, again, we talked about how that's in the original stories. They play Pooh Sticks in this movie. And there's so many more. There's so much about this movie that is true to the actual stories and the original works. And not only is that just absolutely the way that it should be, it speaks to how these stories have always touched a place in our heart. And that's why they haven't really changed. There's no need, there's never really been a need to change them. They have evolved with time, of course, but Pooh Bear has always just been Pooh Bear. And if that is not inspiring, I don't know what is. So, how did we get to where we are today, folks? How did we get from Winnie the Pooh's very first full length feature film to the mega star of a wonderfulness being? And you can quote me on that Winnie the Pooh is. I will tell you. So I feel like all of us grew up with Winnie the Pooh, and that's probably because most of us did. So, like I said, many, many shorter features were released all throughout the 1960s. And then we got the first full film in the 70s. But we've obviously continued to get small features, bundles of episodes and movies, many of which I would love to talk about. But, we'd be here for a really, really long time. So I'll just mention a few that are worth mentioning. You know what? They're all worth mentioning. That was a silly thing to say. There is a lot of Pooh Bear content out there. Let's say it like this. There is. So I can't really mention them all. I will just mention a few of the ones that mean the most to me. How about that? So in 1997, we got the film Pooh's Grand Adventure: The Search for Christopher Robin. Again, this is a movie that I have talked about several times already in this episode, but it is because this movie is just everything. It's everything good, everything beautiful, everything that anybody really really needs. And I'm not kidding. I feel this way very strongly. I really think that anything good about my childhood can be traced back to this film. It is so close to my heart. I love this movie so much. In fact, I'm with my nieces and nephews today. I might go make them watch it after we're done recording here. So that was in 1997. The year 2000 gave us the Tigger movie. And yes, we can absolutely talk about how heart wrenching this movie is. It makes me cry every single time. This movie is heartbreaking and beautiful in so many ways. And it is also the very first time that we get a movie in which Tigger is the main character, which is the cutest, best thing in the world because Tigger is the cutest, best thing in the world. I love Tigger. I love Tigger so much. He's incredible. He's just incredible. Okay, we got Piglet's Big Movie in 2003 and Pooh's Heffalump movie in 2005. In 2011, we received a movie entitled simply Winnie the Pooh. Now, besides the fact that this movie is a blatant ripoff of The Search for Christopher Robin, it's actually a really, really cute movie. There are so many fabulous parts of this film, but there is one scene in particular that is out of this world. It's this scene where all of the characters are talking about tying knots, and they quickly all of them just get really, really confused because one of them says they cannot knot, and off it goes. They say, "Oh, I cannot knot," and then someone says, "Oh, so you can knot." "I know, I cannot knot." "Who's there?" "Pooh." "Pooh who?" It's this whole beautiful play on words that Winnie the Pooh as a franchise is known for. The way that the characters play with words and misunderstand words is so beautiful. And this scene is a really, really great exploration and explanation of that. And it is something that I quote with my sister all the time because it's incredible. It's just great. So, honorable mentions include smaller features that have just created the fabric of my life, really. I mentioned the Cowboy Pooh episode and the pirate episode, and the episode where Tigger is the masked defender. But there is also a feature called A Very Merry Pooh Year, which is obviously a Christmas feature, and it too makes me cry. It is just A Very Merry Pooh Year is a gorgeous, glorious film. If I had to recommend a Pooh Bear movie, that's probably the one that I would recommend because it speaks to Pooh Bear and to human existence and to all of us on so many levels. And it's just incredible. It just really is. Um, but we can also talk about a few episodes that came out many moons ago. There's an episode where Pooh Bear moves away for about 5 minutes and Eeyore moves into his house while he's gone. There's also an episode where they fall down a wishing well on Tigger's birthday. And that's another episode that we quote all the time. Eeyore gives Tigger himself and he goes, "Oh, thanks, Eeyore. Just what I always wanted." Honestly, there are just too many Winnie the Pooh creations that I love. And more than this, Winnie the Pooh and all of these many, many creations have been a huge part of my life. And I think I can safely say they've been a huge part of pretty much everybody's lives. Honestly, I have never met a single soul who had anything bad to say about Winnie the Pooh. Not only would that just be psychotic, so if you're a person who doesn't like Winnie the Pooh, feel free to keep that to yourself because I will not be receiving negativity about Pooh Bear into my world. Thank you. But I just think that in general, I don't think there is anything bad you can say about Winnie the Pooh. There's nothing bad you can say about him, about his friends, about the stories. Again, they're just part of the fabric of our society at this point, a part of who we are as people. And it's really beautiful because obviously these stories originated in England, but they have spread throughout the entire world. I mean, Winnie the Pooh is known to so many people. We all know who Winnie the Pooh is, and we all know who his friends are, and we all understand the purity and simplicity and love behind them and their friendships. And I don't know how to accurately express how perfect that is. And it's an example of how in our world, like there are so many things that are not good and that need fixing. But we have little things like Winnie the Pooh. And maybe that just simplifies it too much. Maybe that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but things like Winnie the Pooh, things like this that have spanned over a century, that have tied people together, it's one thing. I mean, these are the kinds of things that give me hope in humanity. These are the kinds of things that I think end up saving us as a society in the end. That we can touch on things like this that have stood the test of time and have brought us all together and put real emotion and memories and purity and love into our hearts. I think it's so, so important. Now, this is actually the end of our episode today, folks. But this is not the end of the Pooh Bear story. Nay, nay, nay. I have many more notes. So, the good news is that this is our very, very first two-part episode. That's correct. The very first two-part episode of Not Strictly History is about Winnie the Pooh. And I could not be happier with this information. I feel very good about it. So, thank you very much for listening to part one. Next time, we're going to be talking about more fun facts about Pooh Bear, more adaptations, more films. We're going to be talking more about Christopher Robin himself. We're going to be talking about, oh my goodness, just so many things. There's more. We're going to be talking about places in London. We're going to be talking about Christopher Robin's life. We are going to be talking about mail. We're going to be talking about Latin. That's right. The Latin language is going to feature in next week's episode. So, trust me, there's more to the Pooh Bear story, and we will absolutely be getting there. Again, thank you so much for coming with me on today's episode, for hanging out with me, and learning more about the amazing Winnie the Pooh. Again, join me next time for part 2 of Winnie the Pooh, where we will finish it out. I love you guys so much. You can give me a follow on Instagram at notstrictlyhistory_podcast. You can also email me at notstrictlyhistory@gmail.com if you want to join the conversation, if you want to request an episode, anything like that. Again, thanks for hanging out with me today. You have a blessed rest of your day, and I'll see you next time on Not Strictly History.